How's it? In the previous videos, we have covered topics such as reasoning and how it affects us, and Professor Kassim's work, and that we should learn to think more slowly. We also covered what bias is. We then covered general biases before moving on to the specific biases that affect both photographer and photographic judge. In this video, I will be covering the last of the cognitive biases and how we can minimize the impact of these biases. Belief bias is a cognitive bias where people are more likely to accept arguments or conclusions as valid if they align with their pre-existing beliefs, regardless of whether the reasoning supporting them is logically valid. Conversely, they may reject conclusions that contradict their beliefs, even if the arguments are logically sound. This is similar to intuition bias, and Barack Obama's words again become relevant. Increasingly, we become so secure in our bubbles that we accept only information, whether true or not, that fits our opinions instead of basing our opinions on the evidence that's out there. In photography, belief bias can manifest when people interpret or judge photographs based on existing beliefs rather than evaluating the photo itself on its technical, artistic, or factual merits. A heavily edited photo may seem as artistic and creative by someone who values post-production, while another person might dismiss it as fake or untrustworthy if they believe photography should be purely documentary. The belief about what photography should be overshadows an objective evaluation of the image. The bandwagon effect or group attribution bias is about us believing or doing things because other people believe or do the things. By conforming to what everyone else believes, both photographer and photographic judge can inhibit new thinking and approaches. Judges should encourage photographers to take fresh viewpoints instead of following convention. Group attribution bias is the tendency to assume that characteristics of an individual represent the entire group, or vice versa. The most obvious examples of the group attribution bias are stereotypes based on race or gender. What's more interesting is how we leverage the group attribution bias to our benefit. It is an ingrained feature of human nature. Not only do we judge others for being part of a perceived group, even if they're nothing like those groups, but we also try to identify ourselves socially with groups to raise our own status. A good example of this bias is this image. You can see the use of the white vignette. Many judges will mark these images down as they consider the only type of vignette is a dark one. This bias is often seen in trends within art. The rule of space, where space is left for the subject to look into or move into, as in this image. While ignoring this rule can have a dramatic effect, yet judges may be influenced by current trends in photography, favouring popular styles or techniques over unique or unconventional approaches. The song from Fiddler on the Roof, "If I Were a Rich Man," exemplifies authoritative bias with the lines, "When you're rich, they think you really know." Authoritative bias in photography refers to the tendency to perceive certain images, photographers, or sources as more credible or valid based upon their authority, reputation, or the context in which their work is presented. This bias can influence how photographs are interpreted, valued, or used, often independently of the actual content or quality of the image. Authoritative bias, a term popularized by American psychologist Stanley Milgram, is defined as having an incorrectly high belief that information verified by a person with formal authority is correct, and therefore an individual is likely to be more influenced by them. Individuals in positions of authority are seen to be treated more favorably, where people believe their views with increased certainty. Though the role of authority alone is not always significant enough to directly affect decision-making without this phenomenon being used in conjunction with other heuristics and biases. The antonym of authority bias is blanket opposition to authority, disregarding their knowledge and believing authority figures to make inherently false claims. This relates to the view of anti-authoritarianism and is often referred to as conspiracy theories or conspiracy theorists. Authoritative bias also has a subset, namely gender authoritative bias. This subset explains the situations in which women are more likely to be subject to authoritative bias than males. This is evident in several scenarios, such as politics. Evidence of this subset in the political world comes from the research into leadership using the implicit attitude test. Female political figures face greater resistance to their authority in comparison to their male counterparts. Authoritative bias, therefore, is strengthened when the authority figure is male as opposed to female in politics. In the business world itself favours males as authority figures, as men are perceived to have better control over resources and make decisions for themselves. In the media, women are also more susceptible to authoritative bias, as they are supposedly more influenced than men when hearing fake news from an authority figure. In the arts, women are also susceptible to authority bias. For example, try to name 3 famous male painters from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Suspect that you did not have trouble. Now try and name 3 famous female painters from the same period. I suspect that you had a lot more trouble. Here are 3. Mary Cassatt. In fact, in the 1880s, Edgar Degas is reported to have said that women could not become great painters, as they could not grasp the principles of design. Jessie Lavington Evans was a famous Australian artist. Rosa Bonheur is another very famous artist. Authoritative bias is used as a marketing strategy to increase the legitimacy of claims made about a product. A common example in advertising is where, say, a toothpaste company such as Sensodyne promotes the validity of their claims by ensuring the dentists wear lab coats, resulting in the consumer seeing this as being more trustworthy of the product and consequently more likely to buy the product. Authoritative bias is also often seen in instances like this, where an image taken from a drone is accepted because an image from a famous photographer has been taken from a similar viewpoint without understanding that this image was actually taken from a helicopter and not a drone. Authoritative bias is also linked to groupthink bias. This is evident in group judging scenarios where individual judges might conform to the majority opinion rather than voicing their own independent assessments. In the digital age, deep fakes and misinformation are an ever-increasing problem. As image manipulation becomes more and more advanced, authoritative bias can be exploited. For instance, people might trust an image simply because it appears in a familiar format or is shared by a credible account. Implicit bias is closely related to cultural bias and in photography refers to the unconscious attitudes, stereotypes or assumptions that influence the choices a photographer makes and the way viewers interpret images. These biases operate below the level of conscious awareness and can affect everything from subject selection and composition to post-processing and interpretation. Implicit bias in photography can perpetuate stereotypes, distort narratives, or reinforce social inequalities without the photographer or audience being fully aware of it. Implicit bias creates attitudes or stereotypes that can affect or influence our decisions in an unconscious way. This unconscious bias affects many people because they are unaware of origins for their baseline thinking. For instance, an image of Uluru may be favoured by Australian judges because it is familiar, but it may also be devalued because it is familiar. Yet overseas judges may value the image highly because it is exotic. This has been my experience with overseas competitions and judges. I was involved in a meeting with an American company some years ago, and one of the delegates said, "But isn't your country all desert?" demonstrating his unconscious bias and stereotypical idea of Australia, which can be very different from his idea of reality. Photographers may gravitate towards subjects that reflect their own cultural, social, or aesthetic preferences, unintentionally excluding perspectives which can be very different from his idea of reality. Photographers may gravitate towards subjects that reflect their own cultural, social, or aesthetic preferences, unintentionally excluding other perspectives. This is called unconscious favoritism. Many judges suffer from this type of favoritism when judging club images, often expecting too much from those with less experience within a particular genre. Implicit bias can lead to underrepresentation of certain groups, reinforcing their invisibility in media and art. Implicit bias can shape how subjects are portrayed, reinforcing stereotypes through visual cues such as lighting, angles, or background choices. Here, it is reinforcing the idea of Australian beach culture. In this example, the use of dark, moody lighting for images of urban neighbourhoods might unconsciously perpetuate narratives of danger and decay. The positioning of a subject, e.g. looking up or down at them, can unconsciously reflect societal hierarchies or reinforce dominance. Confirmation bias is the tendency to seek, interpret, and favour information that aligns with one's existing beliefs or expectations while disregarding evidence that challenges them. In photography, confirmation bias can influence both the creation and interpretation of images, shaping narratives and perceptions in ways that may reinforce stereotypes, distort truths, or limit creative exploration. This is also another good example of what Barack Obama was talking about. This is seen to be the chief bias we suffer. It has 188 known applications. It is when people create a hypothesis in their minds and look for ways to prove it. It is the innate tendency to seek out confirmation of our preconceived beliefs. For example, when a judge forms a distinct opinion about a portrait based upon a tiny piece of information, such as who the subject of the image is, they are succumbing to confirmation bias. Other great portraits may not make it to the exhibition or acceptance list, or be perceived as less competent than others because of these assumptions. Judges may decrease their chances of acknowledging great portraits due to evaluating via confirmation bias. It is favouring information that conforms to your existing beliefs and discounting evidence that does not conform. This is a particularly pernicious subset of cognitive bias. You remember the hits and forget the misses, which is a flaw in human reasoning. People will cue into things that matter to them and dismiss things that don't, which can lead to the ostrich effect, where a judge seeks to avoid information that may disprove their original point. Confirmation bias is thought of as cherry-picking. These cherry-picking facts to support one's views are usually done consciously. However, confirmation bias generally happens unconsciously. If we believe our lucky colour is yellow, we will actually start to see yellow more often. It's not that you're wrong. There are tons of yellow things in your life, and some of them are involved in your positive experiences. In fact, the easy availability of confirmation bias online has created what researchers call echo chambers, where people continually only get fed information that supports their pre-existing views. This is bad for truth and understanding. So the problem with confirmation bias is not that you're wrong, it's that you're not seeing the whole picture. It's a universal flaw in human decision making and can be mitigated, but almost impossible to eliminate. In practical terms, in a University of Sydney study, it has been found that personality differences and demographic differences may lead to different art preferences as well. One study tested people's preferences on various art pieces, taking into account their personal preferences. The study found that gender differences exist in art preferences as well. Women generally prefer happy, colourful and simple paintings, whereas men generally prefer geometric, sad and complex paintings. An age difference in complexity preferences exists also. Preferences for complex paintings increases as age increases. Examples of confirmation bias in photography could include photojournalism, where coverage of a region experiencing conflict may focus disproportionately on violence, confirming stereotypes of instability while neglecting stories of peace, building, or everyday life. Travel photography, where photographers might emphasize exotic or primitive aspects of a culture to meet audience expectations, ignoring modern or diverse elements of the community. Subject interpretation, where photographers may unconsciously choose subjects or interpret scenes that align with their preconceived ideas or expectations of the audience. For instance, a judge requiring a macro image to be a replica of a scientific style image and may require the image to be pin-sharp foreground to background, may ignore a more artistic image where depth is created by including distance blurring. How a subject is framed can emphasize specific narratives that confirm biases. For example, using a wide-angle lens to highlight disorder in a crowded space, reinforcing assumptions about chaos in an urban environment. Post-processing decisions, such as cropping or color grading, can subtly guide viewers towards interpretations that align with the photographer's beliefs. An example of this is desaturating images of a region to emphasize bleakness, aligning with stereotypes of poverty or hardship. Confirmation bias is a common bias that affects both photographer and judge. Physiological bias in photography refers to the ways in which the physical and sensory limitations of human perception, both on the part of the photographer and the viewer, affect the creation, interpretation, and experience of photographs. This bias arises from the physiological characteristics of our eyes, brain, body, influencing how we perceive light, colour, movement, and spatial relationships in an image. Why do portraits nearly always do better in open competition than other subjects? Why are landscapes favourites? These two are some of the most common questions asked when it comes to judging. It is about physiological bias, which we cannot overcome without serious objectivity and a broad understanding of the art of photography. Let's take each subject separately and see how physiology affects us. Portrait subjects are popular and the quality of the images vary considerably, but if there is any form of beauty, emotion, character, personality, or enhancing technique, then we become a pushover in firstly making people images and secondly awarding them in competitions. But why is this? The answer lies in a part of the brain called the facial fusiform area, which governs and emphasizes facial recognition. The eyes are often placed on the third line or near the cardinal points for more engagement, as they are the central point upon which we innately pay attention. A direct gaze is often more intimate, while a subject looking away can create curiosity. Our eyes naturally focus on sharpness in faces, so out-of-focus portraits can feel unsettling. It's of no use trying to fight this, it's there. So as judges, we need to understand this, and if there is another image of a different subject matter in an open competition, then very careful analysis needs to be undertaken before allocating any findings. Landscape and physiology come together when cone and rod sensitivities are combined in our eyes. Here, green wavelengths produce nearly double the sensitivity of the red wavelengths and nearly quadruple those of blue. What this means is that in low light situations, when the cones are unable to produce a precise colour image, our rods are able to pick out subtle green things more than any other colour. Not all landscapes are green, but this sensitivity contributes to our leaning towards them as a favoured subject. In addition, generally landscapes are horizontal, meaning they are restful, contributing their appeal and why they are the preferred choice when hanging an image in our lounge room. But not all landscapes are horizontal either. Colours also contribute to the physiological bias. Colours such as green, purple and blues evoke calmness, distance and melancholy. Here the green and the moving water are creating a sense of calmness. Understanding physiological bias helps photographers create stronger images by working with how humans naturally see and process visuals, whether it's enhancing depth in landscapes, capturing emotion effectively, or using colour psychology for emotional impact. These biases shape the way that we both take and experience photographs. Thanks for sticking with me till the end of this video series. These are just a small number of the cognitive biases that exist. For instance, we have not covered biases such as hindsight bias or self-serving bias, plus many, many others. As a photographer, embrace discomfort and curiosity, break routines and challenge your biases. This will help you understand your audience. In these videos, we have covered a fair few biases and it is a lot of information to assimilate. But now, I think you would like to understand how to overcome these biases. In a word, you can't. Being aware of biases and how biases might influence your thinking and judging can help minimize their impact, although it can never eliminate them. Research by Sydney University suggests that cognitive training, as you have done by watching these videos, can help minimize their impact. In the study, researchers provided feedback and information to help the participants understand these biases and how they affected their decision making. The results of the study indicated that this training could effectively reduce the effects of cognitive bias by as much as 30%. So no need to hide away from these biases. Seek out honest feedback, especially when judging camera clubs. I know some judges absolutely refuse any sort of feedback whatsoever, and I wonder how these judges can ever hope to grow, to improve, and to give honest feedback to the photographers. You go to the gym to exercise your body, to keep fit and healthy. It is no different with your mind. Challenge your biases. If you notice that there are factors influencing your choices. Focus on actively challenging your biases and asking yourself questions such as, what are some of the factors you've missed? Are you giving too much weight to certain factors? Are you ignoring relevant information because it doesn't support your view? Thinking about these things and challenging your biases can make you a more critical thinker. The truth is, these cognitive biases are an ingrained feature of human nature and can't be turned off with the flick of a switch. Becoming aware of them is not enough. We must stay aware of them. The best tool for managing your biases is your ability to notice them and to handle them more effectively. Not only does being self-aware mean catching your biases when they kick in, it means actively challenging your biases. I've heard judges complain, I can't see why this image was taken, or this image does nothing for me. These are statements created by your own biases and are irrelevant to a good judge. Remember, the image that you are judging is not yours. So what you like or don't like is irrelevant. It is the photographer's image, and it is your job to overcome your biases, to give the photographer the best advice that you can to help them improve their images. I hope these videos help you to understand the many biases that affect your judging, and that now being aware of them, you can effectively challenge them and become a better judge. Until the next video, good luck with your judging.